Say, Mr. Jessel.
Yes, Meredith, what is it?
Clyde Devina wants you to introduce him to Frank Morgan.
On the level, Clyde, do you mean that?
Yes, I've been wanting to meet him the worst way.
Well, any way you meet Morgan, that's the worst way, I'll tell you. Whatever you want, all right. Say, Frank!
Well, that's the last time I play cards with those musicians. Those fellas cheat.
Now, wait a minute, Frank. Don't
What?
you accuse my men of sharp practice.
No, Wilson's men don't practice at all. There.
Well, all I know is I sat there with 3 aces full, and that thieving piccolo player comes up with a straight flush ace high.
So the guy had a straight flush. What makes you think he's cheating?
Well, I know what I dealt him.
Frank, take those kings out of your sleeve and shake hands with Clyde Devina.
Oh, yes, I know your brother, Andy Devina.
Divine.
I think it's Ducky, too. He's a nice kid.
No relation, Mr. Morgan.
No, Frank, this man is Clyde Devina. He fools with cameras. He is also a registered voter.
Oh, cameras, huh?
Yes, Frank. That should lead you into 4 minutes of fast lies.
Mr. Devina, I am profoundly interested in anybody that loves photography, especially the vast army of fellows like yourself, the Dubs.
Dubs? You're an expert cameraman, huh, Morgan?
Am I? Who do you think invented the slow motion?
2 Scotchmen reaching for a dinner check.
A cheap quip worthy of the variety stages.
Yeah. I wish I could get on one, too. What do you think of that?
Don't try to change the subject. I could talk for hours in my stage career. I'm talking to Mr. Devina now about photography. Tell me, sir, do you get your snaps developed at the drugstore?
Well,
Don't apologize. My friend is as good a place as any.
Frank, Mr. Devina has done quite a bit of work with the camera. His last assignment was too hot to handle.
It was. They should have sent for me. Well, nothing's too hot for Morgan to handle. Why, when I was a newsreel cameraman, I spent 4 successive years covering the beauty contest in Atlantic City. I didn't get any pictures, but I did plenty of work in the darkroom. It's surprising what you can develop there.
Mr. Morgan, I used to be a newsreel cameraman myself.
You were? Then you must remember me. I made my reputation in 1924, covering the coronation speech of the King of Baronia and the eruption of Mount Vesuvius.
Oh, now, wait a minute, Mr. Morgan. Both those things happened on the same day, 3,000 miles apart.
Oh, they did?
Yes. How could you be in both places at the same time?
How could I be in both places? Yes, well, that year I was leading a double life.
I still don't understand it, Mr. Morgan.
Skepticism is every man's privilege. Nevertheless, I got both pictures.
Well, all I can say is that a shot of the Vesuvius eruption and the King's coronation address should be pretty valuable.
Well, they've been worth a fortune, my friend, had I not made a careless oversight which resulted in a double exposure.
Really? What happened?
Well, we ran the film in the projection room, and as soon as the king began to speak, molten lava ran out of his mouth, smoke poured out of his ears, and believe it or not, his coattails were on fire.
Oh,
Now, this is going too far, fellas. I don't believe it myself.
Well, Mr. Morgan, I covered the first transatlantic flight in 1923.
Is that so?
Excuse me, gentlemen. Did you know that the average annual rainfall in New Jersey is 13.5 inches?
What's that got to do with photography?
Nothing, but I haven't said anything since page 2. All right, go ahead with your camera work.
Jessel, for a man who knows but nothing about photography, you're being very negative. Oh, I didn't do that either. What were you saying, Devina?
I meant to ask you, Mr. Morgan,
Yeah?
have you had any experience with three-dimensional photography?
Son, I solved all the problems of three-dimensional photography and three-dimensional projection in the year 1922. When I had it perfected, I took a picture of a locomotive speeding along at 60 miles an hour and projected it before an audience at the Pismo Avenue Theater in Long Beach, California.
Well, what happened?
Well, it was so real, the locomotive ran right off the screen and killed 50 people. It'll never be popular.
What was your first experience as a cameraman, Mr. Morgan?
My first experience, Clyde, oh, gracious, I'll never forget it. I was a cub on the old New York Sphere at the time, and the city editor sent me down to get pictures of the arrival of Fulton's new invention, the steamboat, when it arrived in New York Harbor.
But, Mr. Morgan, the steamboat was invented in 1845.
That's right, but there were no cameras in those days. I went down to the harbor, a raw country boy, apples in my cheeks, stars in my eyes, and a pawn ticket in my pocket.
A pawn ticket?
Yes, I'd had to pawn an heirloom, my grandfather's fine old watch, to get money for my camera.
You must have got a pretty good camera with all that money.
Well, no. Even in those days, you couldn't get much of a camera for 28 cents. What did my grandfather care about the time?
28 cents?
Well, a small sum, no doubt, but my ingenuity was equal to the challenge. I found an old Maxwell House coffee can, bored a hole in the end of it, bought a percolator top in the dime store for a lens, and constructed an ingenious shutter with a pair of old sugar tongs. I rushed to the pier and stood with the other photographers waiting for the historic event.
I suppose the other boys had pretty classy equipment, didn't they?
Did they? $8 million worth of cameras were on the pier that day. Graflex, reflex, duplex, triplex, and Kleenex. I'll never forget how they simpered at me when I arrived with my homemade coffee can camera.
Did you really hope to get a picture?
My confidence never flagged, but just as the pretty craft slid trimly into a slip, a cowardly representative of the Daily Bugle gave me a push from the rear. I can feel it to this day, and dumped me into the churning waters of the North River.
Oh, what a terrible break.
Never fear, a Morgan turns misfortune into opportunity. There I was, 6 feet underwater as the Claremont passed above me. And what did I do? I focused carefully and made a daring underwater shot, the first angle shot in history. Having snapped the shutter, I rose to the surface, swam ashore with the camera between my teeth, and rushed home, still dripping, to develop my precious film. To save time, I poured the solution right into the camera, let it stand for 3 minutes over an infrared heating lamp, took off the lid of the coffee can, and what do you think?
You had the greatest picture of them all.
No, but I had a darn fine cup of coffee. Don't forget to vote for me, Davina. So long.
Well, folks, I imagine you won't need more than one guest to tell what comes next in the order of the evening. That's right. That cheery custom of ours, a moment of relaxation over a steaming, fragrant cup of the new Maxwell House coffee. But first, a special announcement. General Foods Corporation invites you to hear the new Joe Penner Show, presented by Huskies, the tempting new whole wheat cereal. It starts next week. Consult your local newspaper for time and station. Yes, sir, Joe Penner will be back next Thursday night. And now, Meredith, you'll pour out some music. We'll pour the Maxwell House coffee that goes with it. We now pause briefly for station identification.
Maxwell House takes pleasure in presenting one of MGM's newest discoveries, Miss Christina Wells, presenting a special arrangement of melodies from Rudolph Grimmel's famous operetta, Rose-Marie.
When I'm calling you,
Good luck, sir.